Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sherry Gleed. I am proud to be the Dean of NYU Wagner. And on behalf of NYU Wagner, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion on cities, business, and climate change. We are so pleased to welcome again the sponsors of today's event, the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. I am not this tall. Together, these two stellar organizations have launched the Alliance for a Sustainable Future, which works to strengthen cooperation between cities and businesses committed to meeting our climate and clean energy challenges. This is the second year that NYU Wagner is proud to host the Alliance's public forum as part of Climate Change Week. I want to offer a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists. Mayor Jackie Biskupski, Mayor Frank County, Mayor Javier Gonzalez, and Mayor Richard Thomas, as well as Tom Cochran, Josh Sawislak, Bob Perciasepi, and Dan Zarilli. I look forward to hearing what this distinguished panel of public servants, business leaders, and environmental advocates have to say. All will receive proper introductions shortly, but on behalf of NYU Wagner, thank you for being here today. NYU Wagner has a long history of making an impact on public service, both here in New York City and around the globe. We have been educating and preparing the world's public service leaders for over 75 years. Through a curriculum that blends theory and practice, our students enhance their skills, build networks, and have new experiences that enable them to address significant public problems and actually get things done. Our alumni all over the world apply their education to make real improvements in people's lives through healthcare, international development, urban planning, nonprofit management, finance, and many other fields, including the environment. We here at Wagner also pride ourselves on being the place where timely, important, and relevant conversations occur, and today's discussion is no different. We recognize that in order to find solutions to a problem, we must look at it from all angles and hear from all sides. The issue of climate change and its impact on our environment is certainly not an easy one to solve, though many of our students and faculty are already actively involved in doing so. For example, one of our student organizations, the Alliance for Climate Change and the Environment, is dedicated specifically to this cause. They are educating their fellow students on these issues to build an understanding of the intersections of climate and other areas of public service. Our capstone program, which is the centerpiece and culmination of Wagner's education, allows students to translate their classroom learning into practice. And last year, 5 of our capstone projects dealt directly with environmental issues. This is an important and vital conversation, and I thank and applaud not only the panelists, but those of you in the audience as well for taking the time to be here today. Before I turn the podium over, I want to take a moment to recognize our friends at the U.S. Conference of Mayors from partnering on events such as today's forum to hosting a Wagner intern over the summer. Wagner and the Conference of Mayors have enjoyed a long and fruitful relationship, which continues today. We are in the midst of planning some more exciting programs, so please stay tuned. And now it's an honor to welcome to the stage the CEO and Executive Director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Tom Cochran.
Thank you, Dean Gleed. It's good to be back at NYU at the Wagner School, and when I come, I genuflect to my former president, Mayor Wagner. This is the one school in the nation that's named after a mayor for urban policy, so this is a very special place. As she mentioned, we've had several events here. We had an incredible event during the last presidential campaign, and we will continue. The Conference of Mayors has been for more than a decade now in the forefront on climate change. Bob, I remember when I was a young person walking the streets of this city on Earth Day with John Lindsay. But in 2005, Kyoto Accords came out from a meeting they had in Kyoto. 147 countries signed. The United States of America did not sign. And Mayor Greg Nichols, the mayor of Seattle, said, if 147 nations sign, can I get 147 American mayors to sign? 147, 500, 1,060 mayors signed the climate accord. And so this year we come to Climate Week in New York City, as we were here last year. And we had COP15 we had COP15 in Copenhagen. We had COP21 in Paris. We worked hard. We worked hard in COP21. We had presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, tribal leaders. They signed the Paris Accords. 1,000 mayors stood on the steps in Paris City Hall with Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, now chair of C40. And guess what? We had an election, and our president quit the climate accords. The United States Conference of Mayors criticized him, took opposition to his statement. But let me tell you something. You know, they can walk, they can talk, and they can talk, and they can quit. But the mayors of the United States, working with other mayors throughout this world, are coming here to New York today to saying that we are doing everything we can to protect our climate. In June of this year, we met in Miami Beach, passed resolutions, continue to support climate. As part of our commitment to do more, Bob Perciasepe, who's sitting here, we joined with him in the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions and formed our Alliance for a Sustainable Future. This alliance provides a platform for private sector and mayors and public sector to come together. This alliance is chaired by Santa Fe Mayor Javier Gonzalez and also vice-chaired by Jackie Pekupski from Salt Lake City. We have today with us the mayor of Des Moines, Iowa, Frank County, and also Mayor de Blasio's Chief Resilience Officer, Dan Cirilli. We are pleased also to have the business community with us, J.P. Morgan, Duke Energy, AECOM. Today we are releasing a study of 102 cities, and we're talking about what we are doing. When our president quits, we keep walking. We keep doing it, and we are doing it. Today we are releasing a survey of 102 cities. The survey demonstrates that cities are trying to reduce their carbon footprint. 2/3 of the cities buy green fleet vehicles, purchase renewable energy, and so on and so on. It's all in our study. Let me just say this. We appreciate the alliance that we have with Bob. As we speak, the President of the United States will speak to the United Nations. He's in, he's out, he's tweeting, God knows what else. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter to us because we are aligned with our mayors. We are aligned with Democrat and Republican mayors. And it's not the big things that you do. We've got fleets. We've got electricity. We're doing everything we can every day. And at our meetings, working with Bob, I think we can do it. So I'm going to now turn it over to Bob Perciasepe, one of the greatest leaders we've got in the United States on the whole question of climate change. Welcome to the stage, Bob Perciasepe.
I just got a promotion, I think. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Dean, for hosting in this. You know, it's a little bit crowded, but we love this space. I love this building, the Puck building. I've looked at it for decades, and I'm so happy that NYU is in here, and how appropriate that an urban studies and public policy school is here in this building. And the last time we were here, there was a gas station across the street. Now there's new construction. So a lot of action and a great neighborhood for you guys to be in. So I always say these things, being a former city planner, I have to sort of get my city planning, kind of vision out the window. I'm not going to say a lot more because I think, Tom, you summarized most of it. I'm going to hit a couple of key points before we start with the panel. First, the Paris Agreement, which has already been mentioned, has sent some pretty strong signals around the world. And one of the things that was amazing to me is when the United States, in May, at the end of May, through the President's speech, announced that they were going to withdraw, which of course is going to take them 3 years to do. They cannot just do it, but they can obviously stop doing any meaningful work on it. No other country in the world followed. There are the two other countries that are not in the Paris Agreement, Syria and Nicaragua. Syria is not in for obvious reasons, and Nicaragua is not in because it's not strong enough. So the rest of the world is there. And so one of the things that we have in the United States that's quite remarkable is a very diverse and resilient form of government that goes from the neighborhood all the way up to the President of the United States and the U.S. Congress. And if the President and the U.S. Congress aren't doing something about an urgent need, the chances are going to be very high, no matter what the issue is, that at the local level, work is going to be done. And that's what we're seeing here. What we're seeing is mayors, we're seeing companies, we're seeing states stepping up and continuing to do the work they were doing and actually redoubling their energy. The survey that Tom was talking about, and there's lots of really important statistics in there, and you can look at the report, but I want to mention a couple of really key things that really are striking and important for us to consider. While we saw what we would expect, that most cities are doing something when it comes to, let's say, electric vehicles or renewable energy or energy efficiency, there's a strong amount of work going on in all these areas. But what we also found is that of the cities who are not yet doing it, most of them also want to do it. So we asked the question about, do you want to do this? And so here's the huge potential. It's not just the fact that we have strong leaders, and we have some of them here with us today, but we also have many other cities in the country that want to learn, and they want to understand how they can start to take action. And so one of the objectives of the Alliance that we're working on is to see how we can take the information from cities that are making progress or have had success on something, and how do we get that information out to the other mayors. And the Conference of Mayors is the premier distribution network for all the mayors in the United States. 1,400 mayors can share this information as we pull it together, and also bring the experiences of the business community. You know, we have some of the major businesses in the United States are taking action. You have companies like DuPont and General Mills and Apple and Google and Microsoft and Pacific Gas and Electric Company and Walmart. These are huge and very profitable and very important companies. And what we're finding is every one of them is standing up and saying, well, we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep doing this because their customers expect it, their stockholders expect it, and their employees expect it. And so this momentum, just like your citizens expect it. So we've got, and actually citizens tend to be employees also in some of these companies. So we've got a real convergence here, and we're releasing some case studies today as well as the survey. That's the beginning of that process of developing the information that we can then share with others. And we have to back it up with our ability to provide a little bit of assistance and help to get people over the hump of implementation. So we, on our case studies, we have Santa Fe, Mayor Javier Gonzalez's Verde Fund, and he'll talk a little bit about that. Salt Lake City, Mayor Jackie Biskupski's Climate Positive 2040. The Mayor of Las Vegas, who is not here, but we have their case study with us today of 100% renewable energy. And Duke Energy, who's not on the panel, but part of our alliance, who's been working with Charlotte and Asheville in North Carolina on some very important sustainable energy projects. So today, and you guys have already been introduced, so I'm not going to do it again, but I want to make sure I get the exact ones here because I think some people were not able to make it today. But Javier Gonzalez, who's the chair of the Alliance, and the mayor of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thank you for coming. Mayor Jackie Biskupski from Salt Lake City, Utah. Mayor Frank County from Des Moines, Iowa. Josh Soslak, the Global Director of Resilience at AECOM. Global Director. I've seen pictures of you in other countries.
I've seen you in other countries.
And many of you here may know Dan Zarelli, who's the Senior Director of Climate Policy and also Chief Resilience Officer for Mayor de Blasio and the City of New York. And we're really, really happy to have all of you with us. And what we'll do is each one of you will do a 3 to 5 minute quick summary, and then I'll ask them some questions, and then we'll do some questions from the audience. So be thinking of your questions. And Mayor Gonzalez, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. On? Good morning. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us here, Dean. Thank you for welcoming us once again. I'm the mayor of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and feel incredibly fortunate to be able to be mayor of such a historic city for 400 years. We've been a blend of multiple cultures that have always recognized that care for the environment has been important. One of the things that I found myself when I started talking about climate change and solutions was having a conversation in my parents' kitchen where they were asking the question, why are you doing this? I mean, it's a matter that, that takes place in big cities, or there's no factories around here. We don't really see pollution going up in the air. And it was a real moment because I understood that just because we're talking about climate solutions didn't mean that everybody got it, and especially the citizens that called our community home. But then when I started to speak to them about the drought cycles in our city becoming longer and longer, the fact that it was getting warmer and warmer year over year, and asked them, do you worry about fires and what the fires would do to our groundwater? That was an instant yes. And we've got to make sure we prevent that from happening. And so it opened up the door to have a conversation with them that there's a reason why we're worried about fires happening. There's a reason why our drought cycles in our city, in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains that are right above Santa Fe, are real tinderboxes for fires that can have a massive impact on our entire community. I wanted to focus my earliest efforts on climate change on the issue of inequality and people living in poverty. Because all the data shows is that people living in poverty will bear a disproportionate share of the impacts of climate change. We're already seeing locally in homes that the idea of home security is less and less available because of the costs of rising utilities. So we convinced the city council to do something that really we didn't quite understand what it was going to look like, but we wanted to establish a Verde Fund, a fund of public investment that would go specifically for investing in programs that were at the intersection of climate change and poverty. And the idea wasn't to just necessarily go and have a fund that retrofits homes or have a fund that puts solar on rooftops. It really was about this idea of it serving as a transformational model for people in poverty. So what were some of the things that were proposed? Working with that youth, teens who had fallen out of the system to come back in to actually learn how to install solar or retrofit homes was an example. Being able to sit down with families and talk about not only how to create more home security, but in doing so, bringing alongside programs that put solar on their rooftops, that put more money in their pockets, and with more money in their pockets, being able to invest that in some of the other needs that they may have. Being able to talk about the food deserts that exist in our city and how we can not only take a farmer's market out to the areas where the food deserts exist, but to really focus on investing in delivering some of the latest in technology and gardening and opportunities straight into the homes where people could begin to learn alongside with master gardeners how you actually grow your own food, and then passing an urban ag ordinance that would allow for them to sell food that they grow, and then working alongside with them so that they understood how to begin to gather more dollars for that. So we're just in early stages of what this looks like. I think the point is trying to find policy or programs that have, when you're talking about the intersection of poverty and climate change, there's not a whole lot out there that we were able to see. So we're kind of trying to pioneer out there, trying to identify what are the things that we want to use to measure our success and how do we get there. But I'm thrilled that our city did it. I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that when you talk about inequality, the issue of economic inequality is important. It's at the forefront, but so is the issue of climate and the impacts of climate on individuals living in our cities. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to our vice chair.
Okay,
Mayor
thank
Viscusi.
you. Thank you. When Salt Lake City committed to 100% renewable energy last summer, we were the 16th city in the country to make this commitment, and we were the first in Utah to do so. Now fast forward to just 1 year later, there are now 150 mayors across this country committing to 100% clean energy, including 2 more in Utah. So we have momentum, and we are all moving in the right direction. The momentum, though, of the mayors for 100% clean energy, combined with a responsive collective activity at the federal level, being so inactive, is particularly troublesome. And the withdrawal from the Paris Accord has placed an enormous opportunity, though, on the mayors in our cities to do this work. So the attention and the support that Salt Lake City has been receiving since announcing our ambitious goals has been tremendous, and it is very welcome. But without action, these pledges are simply words, and that is not who we are as a community. Without partnerships with the community, particularly businesses and energy providers, we simply will not reach our goals. So for our part, Salt Lake City has looked at our goals in 3 general areas. What we can do as a municipal government, how we can partner with our utility company, which is Rocky Mountain Power, and how we can encourage businesses and residents to partner with us. So to the first arena, last week, we completed our latest round of solar upgrades to our own municipal buildings, including fire stations. We added 756 panels, which will provide up to 92% of on-site annual electricity needs for those buildings. Solar on the rooftops of government facilities represents just one path for us in marching toward our clean energy goals. We also worked very closely with Rocky Mountain Power to create a subscriber solar project, which came online in central Utah. And that was a big, important piece to me, that as we pull these coal-type employment opportunities out of the Utah market, that we are replacing those jobs with these new solar jobs. And so by adding 81,000 solar panels to the generation mix, that project not only got off the ground, but it is completely sold out. Salt Lake City was the single largest subscriber to the program, enrolling 90 separate electric meters that are powering our government operations and doubling the amount of clean electricity dedicated to our facilities. So that is all moving in the right direction, but we have got to get another project underway in central or southern Utah. We are also working with Rocky Mountain Power to envision a much larger scale of renewable energy project to ensure the city meets our government operations goal of being powered 50% by renewable energy by 2020. With our new panels and our participation in subscriber solar, the total amount of renewable energy projects equals roughly 12% of our annual electricity needs for city government facilities. So a pretty good number for our first year in doing this work. All of this work comes after we sign what is an unprecedented 5-year franchise agreement with Rocky Mountain Power, which acknowledges our city goals, sets milestones, gives us an opportunity to look back and work with Rocky Mountain Power to make sure we are on track to meeting our goals. So I know that the partnerships are really key, not just with Rocky Mountain Power, but our businesses and our fellow mayors, and how we collaborate and cooperate with one another to really meet the goals that we have set out for ourselves. So looking forward to hearing more from my friends up here. But that collaborative effort also includes transportation. And the infrastructure project underway that Rocky Mountain Power agreed to is pouring $14 million into our main arteries for electric vehicles, and that is a great, another great project that we are working with them on.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor County.
Thank you, Bob. This one on? Everybody can hear? All right. Well, I'm proud to be here to represent not only mayor, but mayor from Iowa out in the middle of the country. And those of you who watch the elections every 4 years, an awful lot of people end up in Iowa just to see what's going to happen. It's really a circus that goes on out there. And so we get a chance to listen to all the thoughts and dreams of those who want to be the next leader of the free world. So it's interesting, as a mayor of the capital city of that state, we get an opportunity to see an awful lot of people from around the world. And participating in the U.S. Conference of Mayors through the years and watching the unfolding of the efforts of the mayors around this country and some of the things that we can do, and starting my first COP with the UN was in Copenhagen. And we sent a group of mayors over there, and we all had great dreams, and we were thinking we were going to watch, you know, a story unfold that we would save the world and the planet and plan for resilience and everything else, and it would all be great. But the unfortunate thing was that was a top-down kind of a meeting. The heads of state were thinking they were going to push this down, and of course there was some disagreement amongst the parties that were participating, and they didn't get it done. And, you know, the question that I think that comes to my mind every single day, and why I participate in this is, you know, how do we move our ambitions for climate and resilience in the face of a changing atmosphere and climate, and, you know, with hurricanes all over the place and droughts all over the place. I mean, here in the United States, we've seen horrific storms in the Caribbean and in the Atlantic, and on the other side of the country in California, they're on fire. Whether it's California or it's Oregon or it's Washington, they've got droughts going on, heat waves going on, unprecedented. And that's just talking about the United States. The same thing's going on around this world. So we have to come back as mayors. What is it that we can do in our own places, and how can we make a difference, and how can we share our best ideas and best practices and hand them off not only in our own city governments, but also to our citizens and to the businesses, whether it be commercial or industrial. And Des Moines is a big insurance area. Those of you who are taking notes, Des Moines is the third largest insurance center in the world. And so sometimes we think we have surpassed Hartford, but at any rate, they claim they're number 2 and London's number 1. So we'll go with that for today. But the most important thing is we think about it, and to tell you a couple of quick stories about the frustrations I had as mayor in the early 2000s, when I go home as a fairly newly elected mayor, and I'm trying to convince people that this whole climate thing is a really good idea, and we're working on it. And I think as we started, we had 5 or 10 mayors that came together, including Mayor Nichols. And, you know, what are we going to do? How are we going to move this whole thing forward? And I'm preaching, and I noticed that my city council wasn't even listening because they didn't think anybody cared about it. And so we had a mayor's task force to work on in the environment and how we're going to change our city government and how we're going to change codes and do all that sort of thing. And only when we had a town hall meeting and about 450 people showed up did finally my even city council discover that citizens and residents cared about the future of their city and what it is that we're doing and how we're spending our dollars and what kind of plans that we can put in place. So I want you to know that citizens play a huge part we're just, you know, local leaders. We're sort of figureheads up there, but we need the support of the citizens to show everybody that this is really important work. So whatever position that you sit, whether it's in business, whether it's in academia, it's whatever, it's all of us working together that are going to make a difference. I'm thinking about, again, my city. We worked on our own buildings in the city. We've got LEED Platinum buildings, and I've got to tell you, I had to struggle with my own staff. They didn't think it was a big deal. They said, Mayor, we'll never pay that back. It's going to be 7 to 10 or 20 years before we'll ever pay back the difference between a LEED building and a regular building that we would ask people to move out on. Well, guess what? They finally, just to tap me down, they put a LEED bid out and a conventional bid. The LEED bid came in under the conventional bid, and so they had to build it. So all of a sudden, we had a LEED building, and our building manager for the city became a believer. And I went to a meeting not long after, and this guy, you thought he invented LEED. And he was one of the biggest pushers back, said this guy's crazy, he's green, it's all that. And all of a sudden, you know, we had national press, and we had this big sign and a glass thing on there, a LEED silver building, and then all of a sudden we had a LEED platinum building, and you'd thought he invented the whole thing. But, you know, I even had the press ask me, aren't you concerned about this? Here, you've been out there working on this, and this guy is like acting like he brought it to you. And I said, you know what? I don't care, because now he owns it. He's going to have to go out, and he's going to have to prove up every single day, because he's bragging about the efficiency of these buildings and how wonderful they are. But now he's got to go out. So it's not the mayor telling anybody to do it. Now our building department owns it. They're out there doing it. We worked with Wellmark. We've changed codes. We've done some things. We tried to help them out. And Wellmark Insurance Company, they're building their new headquarters. And we had a horrible discussion about what we ought to be doing about the future of their building. And I was suggesting that they build to a LEED standard. They're a health insurance company. And so they pushed back, it cost too much, and all of a sudden, he gives me a call after my city council members were saying, these guys are going to move out of Des Moines, they're not even going to be here. And I get a call from the CEO, and he said, I've made a business decision. He said, I think this will work. I think you'll be proud of us. Well, that's all I knew until all of a sudden, the day that they opened the building and cut the ribbon, LEED had come in, and the U.S. Green Building Council had said, oh, by the way, this is LEED Platinum. So LEED Platinum, at that time, this was the largest single owner, single occupant LEED Platinum building in the world. And so we have been able to work with the private sector, in our own sector and others to make things happen. And that's the only way we can do it. We've got to be partners with everybody, and everybody has to understand the benefits of doing it. And I want to say one more thing, and I know my time is up. We also worked with Mid-American Energy. Mid-American Energy is our distributed energy provider in Iowa, at least in where Des Moines is, and they have about 10,000 square miles of area that they cover. A number of years ago, Mid-American Energy wanted to build 3 or 4 new coal plants. And again, as mayor, I was a little concerned about building more coal plants. But it wasn't me as the mayor that helped it happen. I got citizens who went with me, and we jumped up and down, we yelled, we walked, we marched, we did all kinds of stuff. We went to the Iowa Utilities Commission, and I think they got a little nervous for some reason. And they said, nope, no more coal plants. So Mid-American Energy all of a sudden had to rethink, what in the world are we going to do? Are we going to build gas plants? Are we going to, oil plants? What are we going to do? They switched to wind. And so 10 years ago, they had no wind at all. They were over 70% powered by coal. Today, Just before I came here, I called the CEO and I said, how are we doing on being net zero by 2040? And he said, by the end of this year, the end of December, Mid-American Energy, and with our partnership with you and your help and everything else, we're going to be at 49% wind renewable. Huge. But they made that as a business decision, but influenced again by citizens who cared, who stopped the cheapest form of energy, and they switched to wind, and they discovered that after you build a windmill, you don't have to keep feeding it and putting more power in it. It just keeps turning, and the kilowatts keep coming out. And they've made a huge success out of it and have a national reputation. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I think all of us are in awe of the wind power in the central part of the country, and we're all kind of looking to see how we can get more of it and get it to the coast. I'm going to turn to our host city now. And Dan, I'll let you say a few words about what's been happening here in New York, which is, last I checked, a lot.
A few things happening here. Thanks so much for having me here, and for those of you who are from in and out of town for Climate Week, welcome to New York City. We're just thrilled to be able to host this event every year, and thrilled to be able to join here with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and C2ES for this event for the second year in a row, and so thanks for that. The things I think I wanted to convey today is, one, this idea of silver linings. There's been a lot said about the destructive actions of the Trump administration, which are absolutely true, on withdrawing from Paris, and a number of other fronts that continue to push forward on the environmental front, which, surprisingly, the Trump administration is almost most successful on their environmental agenda, which is bad for all the rest of us. But there's two silver linings that come out of this that I've been sort of focusing on for the last couple months. One is that over the last 8 months or so, we've actually had a growing national dialogue on climate. It's in the media, it's being talked about as the hurricanes continue to get stronger that are coming out of the Caribbean. We're having more and more dialogue about climate, which, you know, it wasn't really a topic in the last election. It should have been, but it wasn't. Now we're having that dialogue. I think that's a positive thing to focus on. The second is the energy and the commitment of those who maybe said the federal government should handle this issue in the past, that are now realizing that we cannot rely on the federal government to act on climate. We need to come together and do that ourselves. And case in point, the day after the Trump administration pulled out of Paris, Mayor de Blasio signed an executive order here in New York City committing ourselves to the goals and principles of the Paris Agreement and to act to achieve the stretch goals of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Over the course of the next week and beyond, we are now up at 375 mayors through the U.S. Climate Mayors Organization that have committed themselves to Paris. And I think seeing this collaboration with businesses, all of the city's businesses, states, universities that have come together under the We Are Still In campaign, there is an enormous amount of positive action that is going to drive this forward regardless of what happens in D.C. I think there's some things there to focus on. Now, here in New York City, it's not enough to just say we are going to, to say that we're going to stay in Paris and leave it as words on paper. We have to act. We know we have to act. We set a target a few years ago of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. Let me share a few numbers beyond that with you. We have about 1 million buildings here in New York City as you look across the skyline, and those 1 million buildings account for about 67% of our greenhouse gas emissions across the city. We're flipped from a lot of other cities where the majority comes from transportation. The majority comes from buildings. And lo and behold, the largest buildings, of course, contribute a disproportionate share of those greenhouse gases in New York City, to the point where there are about nearly 15,000 buildings, it's about, so 1.5% of our total, that actually contribute 24% of our greenhouse gases in New York City. So just last Thursday, Mayor de Blasio announced a brand new policy. We are going to begin requiring retrofits of those dirtiest buildings to reduce and get below a cap for fossil fuel use in New York City. And so we're setting caps. We're going to be working with the City Council and with all of our stakeholders and friends in order to get this passed into law, into our building code, to mandate those retrofits. Now, it's a strange thing to hear talking about collaboration between the public and private sector, and at the same time, we're going to be requiring these retrofits. But in fact, there are many buildings that meet these requirements because they've been taking voluntary action. We're rewarding those who have been taking action through programs like our Carbon Challenge and others across the city, where good actors and good owners have been continuing to make those retrofits, saving money, saving energy, improving the air quality. But there are those building owners that just haven't been doing it, aren't doing it, and we're going to make sure that they do it because the city needs it, the planet needs it. If we're going to hit our targets for greenhouse gas emissions, we ultimately need to get those numbers from our existing buildings down. It's been a major challenge for us in order to find ways to drive down greenhouse gases on existing buildings, and this is one next step on how we're going to do that, and it's probably the single biggest step that we can take to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions here in New York City. So, long story short, I guess I wanted to focus on action. There's always, there's lots of talk in the climate space, and I think what you're seeing up here is cities and companies who are acting to drive down emissions and build a better world and build a more resilient world, and that's what we're focused on here in New York City. So thanks for having me here today.
Thanks, Dan. And we'll have more in the Q&A, I think, to go into this. Josh, you're the private sector guy on the panel today. And so speaking of the entire private sector from the United States, no, you guys do a lot of work with cities as well, and so speak to your company, but also to the opportunities for partnership.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Tom, for this partnership, which is really important to AECOM. We're a global infrastructure services firm. We work across the entire life cycle of infrastructure. So we work very closely with cities because that's where the infrastructure is. And we work very closely with companies who own a lot of infrastructure. And the cities and companies work together, and they have to, because it's symbiotic, right? The cities can't exist without the companies. That's where the economic engine is. And the companies can't exist without the cities because that's where the market is and that's where the employees are. And so what we see from the private sector is there's an opportunity here to drive economic development. And so I'm the business guy. I'm going to talk about the business case around why we should do this. Why should we care about investments in climate? The climate issue has become, for a whole lot of reasons, a partisan political issue in this country. The scientific and ecological piece of it. But there's a piece of the climate discussion that is not partisan, and that's the economic piece. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You want to grow the economy and you want to create jobs. Everybody says that. So let's look at how we do that. One of the things that's really interesting about clean energy is it creates very good, higher wage jobs. They're not all technology jobs. Some of them are electricians and plumbers, factory workers, construction workers, and most of them are above ground. So these are actually good jobs, and they're domestic jobs. We can do this here. We are amazing in this country at developing and implementing technology. And we can do that, and we can grow the economy here. When we talk about things like energy efficiency, so that actually saves money. The private sector can work with the public sector and with companies to lower the cost of their operating costs for existing buildings, and we can build more efficient buildings in the future. We can build more efficient transportation systems. We can do all of these things that actually generate wealth, right? They save money, or they create opportunity, they create jobs, they drive the economy. And if we start talking about climate in that economic sense, we create that business case. And I don't have enough time up here to kind of go through all of the numbers with you, but a lot has been written about this. We've done a lot of work on it. I'm happy to talk to folks afterwards, or you can email me. But there is incredible opportunity. Some of the business cases that we've seen and heard about, some more that are in the publication, and even more that are being talked about all over town this week and throughout the year. So it's exciting to be in this partnership with cities and with companies and really look at how we change this conversation from one about, you have to pick between the economy and the environment. I think you can pick the economy and the environment. And you can do it in an amazing way that brings us all together. When we were in Miami Beach for the Conference of Mayors meeting, Richard Florida came and spoke to us. And one of the things that resonated with me is he said, you know, we're self-segregating ourselves politically and economically. We're choosing where we live and who we talk to. And it's making the conversation harder. And we need to be able to break those boundaries. We need to work with people who think differently about certain things, but there are commonalities, things we all care about, and we can do that. So I'm really excited to be part of this effort. I'm really excited to see some of the things that we've been doing. You know, we were here last year, sitting up here. I think we're sitting in the same chairs. We're a year older. We're much more attractive. But what we've learned in this year is we can do things. We're seeing that happening. So I will leave it there, and we will go into Bob's very detailed and brilliant questions, which we will answer.
Oi. Well, thank you. Thank you all for those comments, and I think the audience can see that we have a dedicated group up here, but they represent the surface of so much more that's going on in the corporate and city world. I want to follow up a little bit on a couple of the comments that were made here. Tom, I don't know that you mentioned it in your opening comments about at the annual meeting, the Conference of Mayors adopted a resolution for 100% renewable. So it's a huge symbol of intent and commitment. Dan, you mentioned the spontaneous combustion that happened right after the president made his announcement, and you know, within days, a group called We're Still In evolved, and Mayor Biskupski, I think you were on the very first press conference that group had, which wasn't really a group, it was like a thing. You know, like it just popped up, a pop-up. Right. But it popped up because of the intent and enthusiasm that so many people have to keep moving forward. You know, the climate mayors joined with the business folks, joined with the states, joined with the university presidents. I think everybody at the table here, on the stage here, either company or a city has joined that statement of intent. And so we have commitments like the resolution at the Conference of Mayors. We have statements of intent to keep going. You have actions that you guys have all described. What would be your recommendations to the Alliance itself or to people here in the audience that are working on these issues that could help turn all those intents and commitments and goals into action? What is one or two things that you could mention, and I'll go down the line here, you know, that might be helpful on the implementation side, moving it to the next step? Obviously, that's one of the things we're trying to do, but this is a time for your thoughts on what that might be. So why don't we just go? All right, we'll start with you.
Keep pushing us, right? Mayor de Blasio talks about this a lot, that in these moments, and it's not just on climate, but so often people are pushing governments. People, you know, when we look around, and this audience I'm sure gets it, you're constantly looking for ways to push your leadership to move faster, to go farther. And I think that's a helpful dynamic, and I would encourage you to keep it up. We all need to be kept on our toes up here, and we all need to be pushing for more and more aggressive solutions. And your voice matters, and I think that's a really important message.
Let me give two things, and one for cities, which is think about what you want, but understand that you need to be flexible about how you get there. We have a long history of doing things in cities, and sometimes we have to change the way we do it. But what's important is where you end up at the end. Get what you want. And so understanding that, Mayor Gonzalez and I were talking about this earlier. For companies, understand that the success of the city is critical to you. You cannot survive. The vast majority of big companies cannot survive without cities. People are moving into cities. It's the future. And if you want to be part of that future, be part of building that in the community.
I'll say, going back to something very basic, and that is the best way for us to get to a climate positive place is energy efficiency, which means power down. Everyone needs to power down whatever is going on in your homes or your office whenever possible, because that is the easiest way to eliminate our carbon footprint. And the other thing I will add is we are asking our business partners to participate, and we are challenging them through awards. And I'll give you an example of the awards. Energy Efficiency Project of the Year, Tenant Leadership, Employee Engagement, Highest Energy Star Score, Benchmarking Champion, Energy Data Leadership. And I'm telling you, the number of businesses more than doubled from last year when we started this. And the businesses are now competing, and we all love that. I live in the BYU, U of U country, and they love to compete with one another. And so this works well. Even though we're not forcing, it works well.
I agree with everything that's been said up here, but so let me give a slightly different perspective. The thought that the corporate sector is making a huge move. I gave an example of the insurance industry, and that one business has affected all the other employers in Des Moines because they have to compete in the same market for the employees. But I notice in some of our town halls, there's an ambition on the part of citizens to also get there. In Des Moines, Iowa, and we've got probably 60 to 70% of the residential single-family structures are over 60 years old and lack insulation, lack good doors, good furnaces. Some of those furnaces are 30, 40, 50 years old. But they don't have the money to be able to do anything about it. So we have to work with the insurers, with those bankers, with everybody else to come up with some sort of a scheme. So we know the corporate people can make a decision, and they'll make a business decision to make some money on the deal because they'll save a lot. But somehow we have to also help out the citizens who work for those businesses who don't have a lot of solutions. So I think, again, it's all of us working together, the public sector, the private sector, the businesses that support them, and we have to figure out ways to push it down so every citizen benefits.
Just briefly, I would say what everyone said is correct. Support everything that everyone said. Get involved, required of your elected officials. The other thing is make it personal, right? You can influence a lot of behavior by your own behaviors, so taking on the issue of climate change in your own lives and how you live your daily lives, I think can be high impact. And then the final point is there's huge space left for more solutions to come into the area of climate solutions. So if you have a tendency to want to be an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur, bring your ideas and your mindset into this space and help us identify other solution sets that can help us meet our goals of reducing our carbon footprints.
So, trying to be a little more specific with this question, because I think you've all mentioned sort of the what I'll call the big three, efficiency, energy, reducing the impact of energy going to renewables or other low-emitting sources, and transportation. Transportation, cities, when they look at their own vehicles, they have a small amount of the leading by example, Mayor, as you just said, but it's a small number of vehicles compared to all the cars in your cities. So what has crossed your minds, and Josh, maybe what have you seen in working with cities that cities might move to beyond their own fleets into the wider range of transportation systems in their city to reduce its impact. And maybe we'll start down that end again.
I think it's a great question. Even in New York City, 25% of our emissions come from our transportation sector, and electric vehicles are a key part of that. One big thing that we're seeing, yes, thinking about our fleet a little bit, is that we still need to push for development of more technology here. There are single family, there are generally sedans or private vehicles. The marketplace is growing. Tesla's moving down the price point to a more affordable car. But we still can't get some of the bigger trucks, certainly not our sanitation vehicles or our fire trucks, to be electric. And so one really interesting initiative that we're still working through and hoping is successful is we pulled together with over 30 cities, and this is an initiative that was, I give a lot of credit to LA, they led a lot of this initiative. We pooled our purchasing power and said, over the next several years, we are all collectively, all these 30 cities, going to be purchasing about 115,000 vehicles of all makes and models. And so we put them all on the table and said, manufacturers, come back with opportunities because we want to electrify these fleets. And it's an enormous signal that we are willing to do that, but in some cases the vehicles don't exist. We got back at dozens of responses from auto manufacturers to find ways to start filling those gaps. We're having conversations. I don't think we've purchased anything off of that RFEI just yet, but it sends a signal that we want to move farther, and the market is responding, and we're collectively working together. There's a lot to be said on that. The other is the growth in infrastructure that we need to charge all these vehicles, and it's something that I think we are all very far behind on, and it's chicken and egg because people aren't going to buy the vehicles unless they know how they're going to charge them, putting out the infrastructure outlay without a marketplace. So somebody has to go first. And we've started some conversations. We're doing some work on where to best put things like charging hubs, how to start deploying that sort of infrastructure across the city. And we'll be having more to say on that in the next coming weeks and months as we're doing some more of this work. But we know we have to get out there and start providing more of that infrastructure for charging.
I think there's some interesting things happening in this space, and obviously investments in public transportation are huge, and depending on the size of the city and the kind of geographic makeup of it, it's going to be more effective or less effective, and there are some communities that are more spread out. It's harder to do that. These are land use decisions that are not easy to just turn a switch on, right? It's in New York City, you can move a lot of people in a subway. That's harder to do if you're in Des Moines. And I think there's two things. One, as Dan mentioned, the electric vehicle technology, especially when it starts to get to issues of trucks and other vehicles, is something that is changing. We haven't really seen the inflection point there yet, but when we get there, it will be really interesting. The other one, and we had a business council meeting, and somebody came in talking about kind of the future of energy investments, and one of the things that he brought up was this idea about carbon neutral liquid fuel. And there's a lot of talking about how to do that, because what's really interesting about it is if you can break the code on that, the infrastructure's already there. And so that actually is a real positive thing and it may be in the end it's an electric vehicle or some other kind of vehicle, but maybe there's a bridge to that helps us. And it's going to be a transition. It's not going to be a night and day kind of thing. It's going to get, dark and then light and lighter and lighter, and then the sun comes out.
A couple key things are happening, though. I believe we will see electric buses coming online next year. There is a great deal of work happening in our ports that creates the opportunity for electric forklifts and electric devices to be used in our ports to move product around. Some of that work is going on in Long Beach. We did a tour out there recently, and it's very impressive. But the technology has to continue to evolve. There's no question, and this country has to put its nose to the grindstone to really make sure technology is evolving as quickly as we truly need it to. We also know that we have real opportunities as we develop. So when you talk about land use, I'm sitting on the state's transportation task force, and there's a desire for the state to incentivize land use decisions by local governments, especially along transportation corridors, to make sure that we are developing in a very friendly way to using mass transportation. And some communities in my state have not done such a great job. And so the state is actually, surprisingly, very interested in making sure mistakes like that don't continue as we move forward and develop as a state.
So I guess that one of the things that I could talk about is our effort in city government, at least in the city of Des Moines, to look at electric vehicles, to look at other things. Of course, there was a big push in Iowa for a while for ethanol. I personally don't want to spend much time on ethanol. It's not a model that looking at the numbers, Josh, that made much sense to me. So our fleet is looking at electrical. So we are not only trying to provide spots for the general public to charge, you know, like at our libraries, and we're going to start installing charging stations in our parking ramps and things like that. But also, we're going to our Salt Lake City mayor's point, we're going to put 5 to 10% of our bus system. We have orders in for electric buses, and we're going to see how it works. I think the problem at the moment is the battery are very expensive, and so therefore it makes the payback, because again, back to what model drives people to do it. If you're a business person, it has to make some financial sense. And the payback at the moment, they say, is 7+ years. But I think it's worth trying. We're going to make the investment. We're going to do that. We're doing the same in our fleet and trying to find more providers that do that. But we have to do it across our whole system.
Just briefly to add that everything that's set up here, yes, all areas that we have to focus on as public leaders, we have to be intentional in how we use public resources to purchase green fleet. But I will add, our challenge in Santa Fe, and I think it's the way it is in many communities around the country, is the issue of housing. So more than 60% of our workforce lives outside of the city, and they commute into the city because it's become too expensive to live. So the opportunity to look down the road and be able to repurpose properties for infill that's supported by clean energy infrastructure, where it's actually more affordable, and repurposing properties in areas that are within proximity of where they work is a big deal. So even if you can afford to live in the city, you're living on the outskirts, and all the employment centers are downtown, so there's lots of vehicle traffic. So we have to really rethink our own land use patterns so that we're putting people, or people are able to live closer to where they're able to work, and it's more affordable, and they have opportunity to actually raise their families. Until we can solve some of those challenges, some of those economic challenges, it's gonna be tough to move everybody to green fleets and to using electric vehicles and such.
Well, that was a good discussion, and the reason I asked the question was to try to get what we just heard, and that is that this is not just about, when somebody says we want to electrify transportation, it's not just, although I think these are amazing cars, it's not just buying a bunch of Teslas. First of all, you know, we have very different income levels in every city, and you know, some neighborhoods are just not going to go out and buy a bunch of Teslas, no matter how cheap it gets. So, you know, so there's things like ride sharing. You know, LA is now experimenting with electric car ride sharing type of, vehicle use. Multiple family can use the same vehicle. Buses and transit lines and land use, all things that mayors work on with their counties and states. Looking at the system, transportation planners have this thing they call vehicle miles traveled, and then you can have vehicle miles traveled per person. So you have 2 people in every car instead of 1 person in every car. You can reduce the vehicle mile. That's very simple. VMT we call it. But getting more people in transit, getting more people to be able to share rides with electric vehicles, particularly if there's different income levels, looking at the whole system where the charging stations are. Dan, I have this picture I teach, and I show in a class that I teach that is a picture of Fifth Avenue in 1903 during the Easter Parade. You may have seen this picture. It's all horse buggies. In 1913, it was all cars. That's 10 years. And I don't know who was in charge of making all the gas stations be around then, but they did it in 10 years. At least enough that people could get to Fifth Avenue. And of course, it was a traffic jam, as you might imagine. And it hasn't stopped since. So, but I think the point is that there's so many different components of this. It's not just getting people to buy electric vehicles. So, but that's an important part of it. So I'm going to turn to the audience now, and I'm going to, we'll share, oh my goodness. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We got you, don't worry. You can put your hand down. It may take a few minutes.
So who is missing from the stage is the utility sector. And I'm interested in the problem of an economy and an infrastructure that is built on fossil fuels when we're trying to move away from them, but the model of a regulated monopoly requires a set of barriers and incentives that prevent us from doing that quickly. So how have you, because they're regulated, they can only increase their revenue by selling more electricity. So how have you successfully dealt with some of the regulatory and permitting and distributed generation issues that have come up in your work?
Let me start from the utility side, and I don't work for a utility, but we work very closely with them. So one issue is they actually make money by spending money. They get return on capital. And this is a 100-year-old system that we set up to run our to regulate the utilities. And it was built at a time when the goal was build more infrastructure, right? So we have to rethink that. And some states are. And remember that the investor-owned utilities are regulated at the state level. And so the work that New York State is doing around kind of reinventing that, the work that California PUC is doing, a bunch of other states are actually doing that. And the utilities are working closely with them because they understand that they need to change in order to be successful in the future. So I think there is a bunch of stuff going on in that space. Unfortunately, it's not regulated at the municipal level with the exception of municipal utilities. It's really regulated at the state level, and this is something that has to get worked on in each state because it's distributed that way.
Right, and so for us, Dominion is our natural gas provider. I know they are diversifying their portfolio a bit. It's an interesting conversation around natural gas and just how long we think that will be an energy source. I think we're moving much more quickly away from coal-fired power plants, and that's not the only plant that wasn't built. There's several across this country that have not been built, and that those funds are now being invested in solar or wind. And that's because we're demanding it, and we need to keep demanding it. And the collaborative nature of how you contract for energy is also very helpful too. we created a 5-year franchise agreement so we can do a check-in, right? That's unheard of. Nobody's ever had that in the past. It was 20 years. So, it's getting creative and holding our partners accountable and having real conversations about showing up in good faith. And that is happening for us in Utah.
Hi, Randy Dindial, and thanks for this wonderful conference. About 4 years ago, I was invited by the Times for a global conference on sustainability. The most provocative thing I heard 4 years ago at that conference was that China was going to lead the way on sustainability. So, how do you assess that statement today? And the mayor of Santa Fe mentioned that there are no models out there that he could really gravitate towards to implement his programs. Are they at a point now of possible guidance on sustainability?
So I'll start with this a little bit because part of what we are doing now is tracking emissions so that we actually know where everything is coming from, creating baselines to work from. And as we use software to track, we can forecast and we can do monitoring, and it's happening in thousands of communities. It's not just the cities that we're talking about today, but it's all over the country. That is a super helpful tool to guide us. And then the survey that the Alliance had conducted now really is telling us kind of what is working and what isn't. So this work that's happening in this country is young, comparatively speaking. Yet the power really has to come as we collaborate, and we need global partnership. There is some truth to that, and that global work will help us really move quickly if we join forces globally and not just try to do this on our own.
Just said that the reason that it's been a challenge for us is because when you attack poverty, you get to learn that there's not a single solution in how you actually allow people to rise up from it. And so the idea of the Verde Fund is to bring one solution set to the table in terms of transformative impact through whether it's workforce building, through addressing the issue of utilities. But we learned as we began to work in the community that, as we all know, many things that are holding people back, behavioral, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, multi-generational poverty, all those challenges we're confronting. So I think in every community, the issue of poverty may have some of the same systemic issues, but how we approach helping people and elevating them out, there's multiple approaches, but I feel that in Santa Fe, as in any community, that if you see solar going up in the nicest parts of our community, we should see solar going up in the places that that are struggling and don't necessarily have the best wages. And part of that was the reason in terms of the equity, but I wanted it to be more than just a transactional. I wanted it to be a program that really, through workforce skills or other ways, allow people to begin to elevate themselves out of the poverty levels.
And just quickly on China, the Chinese are stepping forward. I mean, the U.S. is stepping back on the global stage on some of these issues, and China's using that opportunity to step forward. So we'll see how it plays out.
One other thing, we've met with Chinese mayors and U.S. Congress of Mayors did that in California, as a matter of fact. And we had a very interesting conversation. But if you talk to Chinese mayors, they're concerned about the environment, about the particulate matter in there and the health implications, as well as sources of energy to grow their economy. And so it's been interesting to watch them make some decisions as the prices of solar comes down and wind times less than the ongoing costs of operating a coal plant, for instance. So the business case is starting to be made to make that transition. Of course, there's those that are in those industries, fossil fuels, that are not looking forward to seeing their business erode. But those of us who are looking at green economy, there's thousands of jobs. And in Iowa, we've got numerous plants that are making parts for wind generators, and thousands and thousands of jobs across our state. So I know the Chinese are looking at the same opportunity. I think one here, in the back of the room after this.
Good morning, and thank you guys for being here. I'm Ellen McCrae. I'm with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the federal government. But I know, I'm sorry.
All right, we're
except
outta
to
here.
say, I know. But the point, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that there are some of us underneath those high levels that are really trying to do a lot of work. And so part of it is we need you guys to show us that it's still valuable. So all of this stuff is still happening. And we recently, I think, have a new director coming that is a believer. Thank the Lord. But one of the interesting things that I have to ask is really, how is the science going to be most useful to you? And I get it that there are some political pressures, but the point that we're trying to make is that the science is underlying all of this innovation and technology. And beyond that, into specifics around like city farms, would it be useful to use our free information on growing degree days for farming or cooling degree days for air conditioning so that you have more efficient systems so that you know when those days are and when that can work? So my question to each of you is really, where are you using the science that we can provide?
Everywhere we possibly can, for sure, because it is a foundation for how we're able to, or how I'm able to move city councilors who don't believe or understand it to actually see it, especially when the science is so very clear. So we need it daily in helping to build and adopt public policy, and the more that it's available out in different spheres, the better off we are, so it doesn't look like we're just kind of creating our own science or we found it. So one, I think that's certainly important. And then, yes, to the free information that's available. I didn't know about y'all offering free information, but definitely I'm going to hook into that, because I think being able to bring tool sets into our communities that the federal government's already making available and doing it in a way that is helping us meet some of our goals is important.
Let me just quickly say, I met Josh when he had another hat on and worked for the last administration. I got to tell you at the local level how valuable that scientific information and facts are as we try to build a case, as was pointed out with not only our city councilors but our citizens, that, and of course some would say, well, but is that good information or is it fake news or whatever? But nevertheless, for me and for our group that was on the White House Task Force, we created an app and we connected to all that scientific data that you permitted us, or the federal government permitted us, to put up. And I will tell you that it is music to my ears to hear that there's possibility that that data is going to be available, because an awful lot of the connections that we had with our app, you go to it and it's taken down. So we need to get that information back out there. We need to share it publicly. It's valuable in building a case for public sector, private sector, everybody to look to the future of this planet, and especially in this country.
I will add, too, that members of city councils change every 2 years. So, it's very important that that data and that information is not only easily accessible, but also easy to consume and understand quickly. And that it helps us. As you look at some of our smaller communities, aggregate procurement is a real opportunity for cities to network on acquiring energy. And in order for those communities to really understand how that's even possible, having data is truly helpful to them. And then like my Department of Sustainability helps all the little communities in Salt Lake County understand what to do with that data and how to sell their own communities on moving in the right direction.
Can I add two things? One is thank you for staying at NOAA and continuing to do what you do. It's just so vitally important that we all do recognize that is amazing work still happening at the federal government. And one that I think you know that I'm aware of is I was recently rudely kicked off of a NOAA Federal Advisory Committee on the Sustained National Climate Assessment. And the Sustained National Climate Assessment, I think, is partly an answer to what you're talking about. And my experience there are really driven by what we've done here in New York City with the New York City Panel on Climate Change. And we have a group of academics that are regionally based that help us think through the implications of the most recent projections and use that to inform our policy. And so everything we do in New York City in our climate policy is informed by the best available and local science. And that's, I think, it's a reason that we should be using this information that's available at NOAA and other federal agencies to inform what we're doing. Not everyone has the capacity of New York City to set up their own panel on climate change, but the resources in the Climate Resilience Toolkit and other tools that are out there can help cities and mayors and businesses apply that information in the smartest way possible. So it's a really important point. Thank you.
All right, so we have two more lined up here, I'm afraid, and we may run out of time after that. But I also want to thank you for bringing up the issue of all the employees that are still working, as a former federal employee myself. But I also heard a plea for us to not lose track of raising our voices about how important the data is, so that gets back in the other direction. Over here.
Thank you. And I have sort of a philosophical question, which goes somewhat to the point that was just made, because it's not just saying thanks to people at NOAA. It's saying thank you for saving lives last week. And the media, the fake media and the deep state saved lives last week. And that's, you've been talking about believers and non-believers. And that's the philosophical question I wanted to ask, which was before Irma came to Florida, it was in a way encouraging to see the governor of Florida, a denier from way back, looking really humbled at what was coming and being very responsible in how he was telling people to prepare. And now, days later, he's saying, well, I don't know how I feel about climate change. And the question, obviously we have Trump ahead of time saying the storm is huge, and then when asked about climate change, well, there have been bigger storms. The question is, how much does belief matter in what you're dealing with? As a climate communicator, I'm always trying to show the financial interest that's there, the political interest that's there. You're on the ground, politically, financially. How much does it matter at this point, particularly when we're facing these storms which are coming even this week?
It matters a lot. I would direct you towards the work that George Mason and Yale have done in this space, and I think it's really interesting. One of the things at another meeting that Bob organized, we had some folks come in from George Mason, and one of the things that the guy said is, most Americans actually believe in human-caused climate change. They just don't believe that most Americans do. So they're not willing to talk about it because they think they're in a minority, because there has been this massive campaign around the science isn't settled. Guess what, guys? The science actually, there's not a lot of scientific debate around this. There's a lot of political debate. There's not much scientific debate. And you know, if you want to understand your point about saving lives, go back and read John Barry's book on Isaac Storm, the 1900 hurricane in Galveston, where nobody listened to the weather forecasters, and everybody died. And the difference happens when we actually get people out. And we evacuated a massive amount of people out of Florida. Where we had islands where we couldn't get people out, we had massive devastation and loss of life because of just the geography of it. So I think perceptions matter and the data matter. And it's important that we recognize that and thank the people who are spending their days and nights working on this.
I think it was mentioned that solar is more available in richer neighborhoods, high-income, let's say, developments. But are there policies being put in place to ameliorate that and to make it available also in low-income neighborhoods and low-income development? Like, for instance, tax breaks, or has Donald Trump eliminated all that kind of tax break opportunity to create solar in any neighborhood, every neighborhood?
Sure. So in Utah, the solar subscriber program I talked about enables you to buy your energy that is driven by renewables, and that follows you. So even if you're not putting panels on your roof, or there aren't panels on the roof of your rental, you can still subscribe to renewable energy through our program, and it costs right now essentially the exact same as the old way of going coal. So there is real opportunity for people in our county to get into a renewable source for their use.
Well, you might be referring to some of the ESCOs and the energy service companies on your bill. And there's a whole thing going on at the state level on the way that they market their services and whether that's a good practice. So putting that aside, that we also have a program called Solarize that we're piloting in a couple different neighborhoods here in New York City, where it's community solar. And just like described in Salt Lake City, if your building may not actually have the roof space to put solar on, but you can subscribe and partner with somebody who does have that roof space, and you all get that benefit.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. And I applaud the work that you're doing with the vehicles and also renewable energy. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about what's being done to sort of re-engineer waste management in your communities, specifically regarding organic waste. As we all know, solid waste contributes dramatically to greenhouse gases. And as someone who works for the New York City Department of Education School Food Program, also represents the Urban School Food Alliance, who has used market-driven change to purchase compostable plates in our large cities, as an example. We know that we can do this in partnership with industry and with inter-agency cooperation across state lines, as well as with advocates like the Natural Resource Defense Council and others. So have you thought about ways to sort of create incentives or motivate infrastructures to create industrial compost hubs nationally? This seems to be in its infancy as far as our research is telling us, and as we continue to be good suppliers of compostable materials in the school meals program nationally, and being able to serve off of round compostable plates for 5 cents through this market-driven procurement, whereas previously it was 12 to 15 cents for schools. We know that we can create the educational system. We know we can create the experience. As many of you mentioned, experiential learning is important. We want the future generation to understand their role in the way that they're selecting their foods and they're composting their waste. But the infrastructure is not there nationally to deal with industrial compost. Comments?
Oh.
I might just say that the city of Des Moines, we are looking at, we first thought single line, single stream recycling was great. Just dump it all in the same barrel and it was all going to be great. Now we're separating organic matter with cardboard, paper, and whatever, and putting yard waste, kitchen waste in one barrel and the others in a different one. And what we're trying to do is get to 60, 70, 80% recycle rather than everybody throwing everything away and just going to the dump. So we're trying to figure out how to repurpose, reuse everything that we're using, and sort of a cradle-to-cradle concept, if you will, on how we look at every single piece that otherwise seems to be manufactured to go into the dump, and how we create a future where we upcycle everything.
Anybody want to say anything else? I'm go ahead.
This is a huge problem. This is a huge problem. About a third of the food generated in the world is wasted. And most of that goes into landfills. And when it goes into a landfill, it does not biodegrade. You know, we think about like, you know, you throw the apple core. No. It goes into a landfill, it creates greenhouse gas. And so we can do so much by reducing the amount of food that's wasted, and then the food that is wasted, if we can compost that food, we can actually do some really amazing things. And there are some great programs around the country and around the world. And there's a new movie out about this called Wasted, which if you get a chance to see, it's actually really cool.
Yes, so I agreed with the observations. I'm going to just point out, just from my own knowledge, two things that you may want to look into. One of them is university systems who are also have also signed on to the We're Still In pledge. Places that I've been to on campus where they've gone to 100% zero food waste because they have composting program. The utensils are compostable, the plates are compostable, all the things you just talked about. So there are a number of universities doing that. The other place that I would refer you to is the Green Sports Alliance. Over 100 sports venues in the country have joined the Green Sports Alliance, and one of the things that they do is collect all the hot dog and other nacho waste.
Is that an official thing, nacho waste?
Nacho waste is totally official. You know, and they are finding places to do the composting. I've actually been to a time at the Philadelphia Eagles before their season started. Every vendor put everything on a table that they were going to do, and they went through every item. Can't do this, can't do that. It was really fascinating. But they're creating demand for the large compost facility. And I don't know where that is now, but it might be something for you to look into. I'm afraid we are out of time. I'm so sorry that a few other hands are up, but we have to be out of here by in 4 minutes. So I know if one more question is asked, there'll be more than 4 minutes of information that'll be imparted. I want to thank the panel, and I hope you all will enjoy this and also learn something from it. And thank the U.S. Conference of Mayors and NYU Wagner School. Thank you.